Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Bullish Podcast. As an introduction, the Bullish Podcast is a conversation about money with the people who know a thing or two about it. If you like this podcast and want to hear more of it, please subscribe to us on Spotify or Apple. You can also connect with Bullish via our email newsletter, Instagram, Twitter, website, or anywhere else that you consume content. We are there. With me today is Elizabeth Eswine, known as Liz. She is the owner of the New York City account on Instagram. She has been called one of the most influential people on Instagram. She's been written up as one of the first family of Instagram by Digiday and the New York Times. And she is a longtime friend of mine. We both went to middle school and high school together. And I'm excited to have her on board to hear a little bit about her history, what she's been up to, and where she's going. So Liz, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Where did we first meet?
Where did we first meet? I think it was in sixth grade.
Sixth grade.
Right?
It's a long time ago. Yeah.
I know. Mm-hmm. How old were we? Like
so it'd be
10, 11? How old you are in sixth grade?
Something like that. I mean, we were young and we got to watch each other grow through the grades. And I guess it wasn't really until late high school, college, when I think, we started to both find our grooves and what we ultimately wanted to do for a living. I was, going hard into technology and IT, and you were going between Pace and NYU. And I guess, do you want to talk a little bit about your kind of journey and how you ended up with one of the most iconic Instagram handles and how that all came about?
Yeah. So my freshman year of college, I interned at Condé Nast. I was at Women's Wear Daily when Condé Nast still owned Fairchild Publications. And Women's Wear Daily is one of the top industry fashion publications. And there I learned really kind of like the ins and outs of advertising, how much a page costs for, front of book, just I didn't really understand how print advertising worked. And at that time, there was very little digital advertising. Blogs were just starting to develop and gain popularity. This is when Tumblr was really at its peak, I would say. And then my second internship was at W Magazine, and that was in marketing. So I really learned both sides of what went into essentially like funding and running a magazine. And then my junior year, that's when Instagram had launched, and they had about 1 million users at that time. Conversely, they have over 1 billion users right now. So it was definitely in the early days. Again, Tumblr and Twitter Twitter is now I would say at its peak. But this is before Tumblr's acquisition from Yahoo. So they really had a cult following. Blogs were really, that's where like the term influencer began, I would say. So Instagram started, I signed up really early on. This is back when the 4 founders were still, or the 2 founders. I had read an article by Nick Bilton in his blog in the New York Times called the Bits blog that had mentioned that Instagram had raised a Series A of $7 million and they had 1 million users. And I was really sick with Lyme disease at that time. So I essentially was just reading Twitter in bed and I came across this article. I was like, well, why not? I live in New York City, so let's register. I tried to register Liz, that was taken. Elizabeth, that was taken. And then New York City registered. And I was like, that's kind of weird, but okay, cool. Again, this is back in like the MySpace, LiveJournal, Tumblr days. So I didn't even think anything of it. And that's back when you had to natively upload in the app. So I went to NYU, and on my way to class, I'd take a picture of like a taxi cab or my cup of coffee or what have you. And then it like really started to gain popularity. And yeah, I remember sitting down at dinner with my family and I was like, I have 20,000 followers now. Like, this is crazy, because why would you mention anything to your family when you like register an account somewhere? It's not like you advertise that you signed up for something. And my mom was pretty early in the .com days. She has a website called craftybaking.com, which has garnered over 12 million unique visitors to the site over the course of its life. And she was like, oh, well, let's register a bunch of different names. So we registered baking, food. My brother works in real estate development. So we have real estate, we have gluten-free. I think we had cooking at one time and that got hacked. But it was essentially domain squatting.
So
that's
when you came home,
beginning of it all.
right. So when you brought up the conversation saying, I have 20,000 followers, what would you say was contributing to the fact that you were able to garner 20,000, and then how did 20,000 turn into a million plus?
So again, this is back when Kevin and Mikey were the two founders, and then Josh and Shane were the first two employees there. So it was a very small company. They only had raised $7 million. And so a lot of tech VCs were on the platform. Dennis Crowley and Naveen from Foursquare were on it. It was just like the early days of tech and social. And the username was, stuck out like a sore thumb. There was also the suggested user page. So there were some days where I would grow by 10,000 followers. And it just was this cycle that kind of spiraled.
So do you think it was you having such an iconic name mixed in with the fact that Instagram's user base was increasing, if not doubling, every couple of weeks or months, and you were kind of just like, everybody signs up for an account, hey, here's a bunch that you should follow, and it's just New York City there, and that's an easy follow. So you were just kind of capturing the rise of all these new users?
User growth, absolutely. And I also think that New York City is such a voyeuristic account, and it's, arguably the most famous city in the world. Mm-hmm. And I sometimes have to take myself out of living here and look at it objectively and recognize how magical this place really is. Thinking of people, that live in the middle of nowhere, or a town of 500 people, and just like how amazing it is to see such a big city with such a diverse group of people coexisting on this, in a city of however million people.
Right. So you've got this account, you've got all these other accounts that your mother and your brother have, you're gaining a ton of followers. At what point did you start to see that this could potentially become a business, or how did money enter the conversation, or brands come into play?
So I graduated NYU, and I think the account had over, 100 or 200,000 followers. And I was still pretty sick at that time. So I couldn't really work a 9 to 5. And I really did have to figure out a way to make something work, because I couldn't live with my parents forever, nor did I want to. And so you're laughing because you know my parents. And so I had the knowledge of what brands were paying for a page in a magazine with a circulation of, let's just say, 100,000 copies. So why wouldn't that budget correlate into this new economy? So again, this is back in the early days, and I co-founded one of the first influencer marketing agencies. Again, this is at a time where brands didn't really even know what influencer marketing was. Some brands didn't even have an Instagram account. This was an entirely new world, an entirely new function of advertising and marketing. And so one of our first deals was with Nike NYC for their training club. And I think they paid us like $50 or $100 in cash. And I was like, Mom, Dad, like, there's something here. And they were like, great, can't really live off of that.
Move out.
But then it really, what?
Move out,
What
right?
did
You
say?
now have $100 in
Yeah,
cash
they're
from
like,
Nike,
great,
so
what do
it's
you
time to
do
move
with
out.
that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then you were working at Starcom, and we worked on a project with Samsung, and that was our biggest project. And that was truly one of the first like hardware mobile clients that experimented on the platform. We did an Insta walk on the High Line. We had a party at the Gansevoort Hotel on the roof, and that was kind of unheard of at the time.
So you were growing on the platform. You had a couple 100,000 followers. You were building relationships with a lot of other Instagrammers. So the idea was that you saw this opportunity from the print side, and now you're essentially brought it over to Instagram, saying, look, if we can go and reach 1, 2, 300,000 people on Instagram, you should be able to pay us similar money to what these print brands are buying. So, is that kind of basically your thought process here? And then you kind of went to the Nikes and the Samsungs to say, look, let us help you figure out how to run advertising campaigns on Instagram?
Right, because my two co-founders at the time, we were all early adapters and early users. So we understood the platform, what was trending, how creative thinkers were building their own brands on the platform. So we understood it from the marketing branding side as well as the user and consumer side. And I think that was really one, something that was a benefit to us. So I was at the Mobile Media Lab for about 2 years, and then I went on to build a company called Cycle, where we represented around 150 different influencers around the world that helped facilitate and create content at scale for our agency of record clients. To your point of migrating, brand dollars from the atypical like print spend, this was, it's difficult because it's hard to prove an ROI sometimes, and brands get a little finicky about that and tracking and conversion rates. But I think that influencer marketing is one of the most powerful tools for brands and marketers.
So you just kind of introduced Cycle. So Cycle, you mentioned that you represented a variety of different creators and they would help create content for brands. So it sounds kind of similar to a talent agent model where there's an actor or a script writer that gets represented by an agent, ultimately to make sure that they're getting, properly compensated for their work and being, getting put in front of people that could hopefully acquire them. So can you talk a little bit about the ethos of where that came from and how that journey was like? Who were some of the kind of key creators and brands that were helping build this up? Mm-hmm. And how did you go from essentially a small mobile media lab to now representing 100+ creators at this next company?
Yeah, so in working closely with a lot of these creators, it was very clear that they weren't properly representing themselves. They were undervaluing their worth. And based on my knowledge from my internship and seeing rate cards and where brand dollars were being allocated, I felt very passionately that these creators should be properly compensated for their creativity and their audience. And so I had met Jason on my next partner at Cycle on a panel, and we just struck up a conversation about, working very closely with these creators, representing them, being able to value their worth properly. And that's essentially where the concept for Cycle came about. Again, this is in the early days. We also wanted to use these creators as a mobile content studio. Instead of a brand paying $400,000 for, 1 or 2 brand shoots, we were able to distribute those funds between 10 to 15 different creators around the world. So we were able to deploy those dollars strategically to generate really creative content from Colombia, Tokyo, Amsterdam, Istanbul, Norway. We were really able to generate some a significant amount of content at a relatively quote discounted fee that brands were attuned to.
Interesting. So it sounds like you identified an opportunity not only for brands to partner with a creator to get in front of that creator's audience, but you were also going after this other line item that is on a marketing budget, which would be production. And a Coca-Cola or a Nike that would traditionally go and pay that $400,000 or $500,000 for a TV shoot halfway across the world, you could pick up the phone and identify a couple of creators that might have already been there, or that have experience or footage already from those locations, and basically package that up for a brand and say, look, we can do this for a fraction of the price, still high quality, and then also bring in distribution there, if I hear you correctly.
Absolutely. And I feel very passionately that these creators know their audience best. They're building their own brands, like I had mentioned, and they understand what resonates, what doesn't resonate, what's, quote, corny, what they're just very integrated with their audience. And I think that that is so undervalued and overlooked. I think if we look at another platform like TikTok, these creators, and Instagram as well, but these creators are their own production studio. They're their own brand marketers. They're their own community managers. They're their own studios. I think the power of these creators, some people laugh, and sometimes I do, at the term influencer because it has been, trampled on a little bit, but these influencers are powerhouses. They're more powerful than a lot of these multi-million-dollar brands. They are, like I said, so integrated and ingrained with their audiences. And I think a lot of these brands often try and duplicate that and fail because they miss the mark. I've seen a lot of Twitter ads that, try and play on a lot of these TikTok trends, and they just kind of fall flat. I truly believe that each, Fortune 500 company out there should really have like an 18-year-old that's a strategist that just informs the marketing team about these trends, because they're at the pulse of what is happening and how quickly things are shifting and what's on trend, what's not on trend, what can catch, and go viral. I think that, these teams are far more powerful than they get credit for.
Yeah, and just thinking about what you just said about how creators are their own media companies, and they know, they do everything from the production to the community management, which typically is a team of, 5, 10, 20 at some of these brands. Putting yourself back in the New York City account shoes, your account has been around for a long time, it sounds like. So can you take us through a little bit of the evolution of your account and what you've been experimenting with? One of the things that I've noticed that's becoming a trend is where when you started off with Cycle and Mobile Media Lab, it sounded like there were a lot of brands that would solely call a creator to say, I'm promoting a new shoe, a new phone, go and create some content for it to promote that, that product. Now it seems like there's a lot of creators that are, or influencers that have been a little, they're pushing back against some of the brand and the advertising that people are running around with, and instead creating their own brands. Can you take me through a little bit of kind of your experience in, creating additional revenue streams beyond just taking money from a brand to make content for them or to advertise on your platform?
So I think a lot of these influencers have really focused on generating a lot of their revenue from ad dollars and sponsorship opportunities, which is extremely viable if you can play your cards right. But I think that there's another angle that has kind of unfolded over the past year or two, where these creators are looking to their audience to generate revenue. Instead of promoting products from other brands, they're going into development and launching their own products, and to really dive into that relationship that they've curated and developed with their audience over the past, 5 that I'm really excited about, and something that we've been working on, and creating products that my audience is really passionate about and excited about. And I think that there's this unspoken camaraderie between people from New York and people that love New York and admire New York. And that's where New York or Nowhere comes into play.
So what's New York or Nowhere?
New York or Nowhere is a lifestyle brand for people who love New York and who live in New York. It is really a rally cry behind your love and admiration for the city. We have a partnership with the New York Knicks where you can go, during normal times and go purchase New York or Nowhere Knicks gear. We have a partnership at JFK in Terminal 2. And it really is a rally cry for New York. It is, essentially professing and wearing your love for the city that you love. And with each launch, so Quincy and I, let's go back. Quincy and I have known each other for a few years now, just within the in the professional landscape and community that we both kind of play in. And we really started to connect during, I would say, early March, and we really began working with each other in February. My God, I messed that up. When did we start working together? I would say Quincy and I started working together in early March when when we were all in quarantine, and we really wanted people to dive back into why they love this city so much, because people were confined to their homes. And a lot of homes in New York are pretty small. A lot of people fled. And so we first launched the New York or Nowhere, How to Make It in New York coloring book. This was free. So people were able to download a 40+ page coloring book of their favorite restaurants in New York City. So Cafe Select, Carbone, Prince Street Pizza, Champion Pizza. And we received a lot of DMs from people that said that they were able to relive their favorite moments from a lot of these New York restaurants they would frequent. So that was really kind of a test for us to see, one, if the audience was receptive to what we were creating, and two, again, really diving into that deep love for the city, because the city was desolate. I mean, I live on a pretty main street here, and I would look out at 4 p.m. and not even see one car. So I think it was a time where people were pretty shocked to see their city like this. And we've received a ton of support from, launching different products, and each product launch has a give back component. So, I don't know if you want me to dive into more of that, or if that explains it properly.
So totally. So from what I heard from you is that you and Quincy, I believe is the founder of New York or Nowhere, teamed up as quarantine was really settling in and said, look, let's create some interesting digital products for people in New York, outside of New York that, love it, and find a way to kind of develop a deeper relationship with it. So that was that kind of as New York City as an account. Was that the first time that you did something that really started to connect at a deeper level with your community versus just kind of promoting, a phone or a consumer good?
Definitely. Yeah. And I think weirdly, I've had ebbs and flows of my own personal interest on Instagram. I think I got really burnt out, especially, working inadvertently on this platform for the past 10, 11 years. Like, there were some times where I didn't even want to open the app because I was just so tired of living it in my personal life and then in my professional life. And it's difficult to separate those. But I feel like when COVID really hit the city, it kind of gave a purpose to the account in some kind of weird way, especially because I was looking at the way that I was consuming media in February and what was happening in Italy, and how, the Italian influencers that I was following, how I was getting information from them, and my curiosity about, what was happening in Milan and Northern Italy. And so I really did feel a responsibility and a purpose that I really haven't felt before on the account. And I think that personally, that really made me feel passionately about the account again. So this was one way to really engage the audience in a meaningful way outside of just, promoting my favorite water or the next new cell phone launch. And we really wanted to test and learn before really diving into a bigger launch. So we launched that free coloring book, which was pretty trendy at the time. Everyone was, looking for tie-dye kits and coloring books and puzzles. And then we launched a postcard set, and that was really inspired by one of my friends who lives in Brooklyn, sent me a card in the mail. And I just thought it was such a nice way of connecting with someone outside of the digital world when we couldn't physically be together. So Quincy and I started working on a postcard set of 10 postcards that were pre-stamped. And we really wanted to make it easily accessible for people, easy for people to send to their loved ones when they, aren't able to be with them right now. And it is such a nice gesture, I think. Like, there's a different feeling of receiving something in the mail versus just kind of getting an email or a text message. So we launched, our initial launch was 250 postcard sets at $20 a set. And we sold out in the first hour. And I couldn't believe it, to be quite honest. It was really a show of interest from my audience. We were really hitting the right notes with them. The price point was right. It really just clicked. So then we opened it up to, I think it was 1,000 units, and we sold out of those. So with that launch, I feel passionately about giving back to the New York community. So each launch that Quincy and I do moving forward will have a give back component. So this particular launch, we wanted to donate to the New York City Food Bank. And by all proceeds were donated to the New York City Food Bank. So we weren't profiting off of this in any way. This was essentially, we just wanted to test and learn. We were able to donate 40,000 meals to the New York City Food Bank, which is incredible in a 24-hour period. So we were really blown away by that. It was interesting because I just didn't expect that. And for me, my benchmark was like, okay, well, if we sell 20, I'll be happy. And that's just me kind of like underestimating and like bracing for impact, essentially. So that was really our first commerce test run on the account.
Got it. So it sounds like it started off with free digital products, and then you turned the digital products into postcards that people could purchase and get sent out. It sounds like you're kind of leading your audience from something that was very light touch, now bringing them in to say, hey, look, like, pay me, right? And it's like what can we continue to sell them? So it sounds like you really warmed your audience up to ultimately now introducing, I think, your latest line, which I saw was something that you did around pride. Can you talk a little bit about how did you go from, everything you just did into then now selling, I think it's merchandise, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So Quincy and I have a joint venture where New York City and New Yorker Knower are essentially the digital and physical megaphone for New York. And I think that, again, after testing and learning and really seeing what resonates and what doesn't resonate, we are able to pivot and learn and grow at a rate that, a lot of these bigger brands aren't able to do because of, white tape, and it's just far more difficult. But then that goes back to the power, like I had mentioned, the power of influencers, and they test and learn and they know their audience. And we launched things that didn't really do well. We launched an activity book that just didn't receive a lot of uptick. And so we promoted that for a few days and we moved on from it. But I don't think that was a failure. I think that we were just learning what worked and what didn't work. And I think that's just as valuable as a success story. Pride in New York is one of the biggest celebrations, I think. Stonewall is incredibly important to the LGBTQ community. And I love every year going and watching the Pride Parade. I think it's just amazing to see the city come together like that. But it didn't happen this year for obvious reasons. So we wanted to launch something that where we donate the proceeds to one of the leading mental health support charities. And we launched the confetti collection. And I think we had about, don't quote me on this, but 15 different SKUs that we launched. We launched crew necks, prints, tote bags, t-shirts, and we only sold it for about 72 hours, and it was a huge success. I mean, it completely blew me away. One thing that I think attributed to its success was this collection. It displayed your love for New York City, but also for pride and supporting other communities within New York. And I think that people right now, especially, I mean, you live downtown as well. I think we've seen a lot of camaraderie in the city. I think that, you know, a lot of people think New Yorkers are pretty rough, but I think that there is this underlying love for one another. Whether, you know, people agree with me or not, that's what I think. And I think that people are really looking to support others right now that maybe aren't as fortunate as them. And yeah, we generated over six figures in a 72-hour period in revenue. We were able to make a substantial donation, and it's amazing.
That's amazing. Congratulations. So it sounds like you really took the long route here with starting off with a lot of branded content deals, partnering with brands, and now you're making this transition towards developing a deeper relationship with your audience, first getting them involved in some digital products, and then it goes into the postcards, and now ultimately it's a full-fledged line of clothing. So knowing, it seems like you have a pulse on where the kind of the intersection of influencers and monetization is going. I mean, you had it earlier in your career, and now you kind of identified that this opportunity. Where do you go from here? What's next? What do you think are some of the bigger trends that, you know, folks that are listening to this, that are somebody that is an aspiring influencer or that, you know, has an audience of 50, 100,000 people, what should they be thinking about? And especially as we go, you know, coming out of COVID and what the future might look like.
Yeah. So just to back up, Quincy started New York or Nowhere 10 years ago. So it has really been a rally cry for New York. And, you know, even outside of New York, LeBron James wore a Cleveland or Nowhere shirt during one of the press conferences during the playoffs. J-Lo has worn Bronx or Nowhere. So it really has been a rally cry for your home for the past 10 years, but my audience has never really been exposed to it, which is interesting to see how it's resonated with the community. I think going from here, influencers really have to dive into the power of their own audience. And I think that, again, it goes back to testing and learning and pivoting quickly. I think that, like I had mentioned, the failures are just as important as the successes because they're all learnings. And you can't succeed without those learnings, in my opinion. And I think that we are at a place where information spreads so quickly that if you do fail at something, your audience isn't going to remember it a week from now. They're not even going to remember what they saw, you know, 3 days ago from you to some extent. Just because you're consuming so much information at such a rapid pace. I mean, I did a commerce experiment back in December, and it quite frankly failed. But from that, you know, you learn what resonates with the audience, what people latch on to. It's really all about learning from their own activity. And I don't know, I'm rambling, but where do people go from here? Yeah, I think that followers and respective audiences are sick of the fluff and sick of the perfection. And I think that's one reason why, you know, you've seen a lot of these TikTok young 16, 17, 18-year-old stars really blow up. Like, they're not prim and polished. They're dancing in their sweatpants. And I think that that's something that people really, especially the younger generation, really want to see. They see through all of the perfection. Even I see through it. but maybe that's because I'm like so close to this world that I play in. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're going to see more of a move, and you've heard a lot about this trend in media of trying to diversify revenue streams. And traditionally, a lot of major publishers were very similar to your internship experience. Very they over-index with advertising revenue. The challenge with advertising revenue is that obviously you're dependent on somebody else's product and their success to continue to get renewals, and that has become a very volatile line of income for these businesses. So they've tried to, a lot of media companies are pivoting now to say, hey, diverse revenue is now the kind of what we want to focus on. Part of that coming from direct to consumer, I think the stuff that you're working on, which is very interesting, but then also non-traditional ways of generating revenue, whether they be partnerships with foundations or kind of special interest groups that are helping highlight particular businesses or small businesses. So yeah, I'm like it's very interesting to see, and it's also very interesting to hear about your journey of testing and learning, because I think there's been a lot of these iconic stories about these influencers that have 1 million plus followers, yet they can't sell 10 t-shirts. And it's like, well, what happened there? And I think the journey that you took us through about really warming up your audience.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I've totally been there. And I think like one thing that Quincy and I were really cognizant of early in March and April, when everyone was launching the t-shirts for charity and supporting restaurants, and we, there's no knocking any of that, because some of them have really raised a significant amount of funds to support a lot of these restaurants and restaurant workers, which is fantastic. But we wanted to just observe. We felt that it was at some point a race to the bottom. How many people can launch something like this within a similar vein? And we wanted we made a clear choice to step back and observe. Which is why we wanted to do something different, like the postcard set. We hadn't really seen anyone do that. And again, it was inspired by me receiving a note from someone in the mail and how powerful that moment was to me. And we wanted to replicate that for other people at a really attainable price point. It was $20 shipped, landed, which, is, it's not throwaway money, but it's not a significant amount of money where people are really second guessing their purchase. And so again, it really is testing and learning. We haven't launched masks. I don't know if we will. We are looking at that opportunity right now and working with a manufacturer and seamstress here in the garment district in New York that's a second generation seamstress. So there's a story, of New York City's origin and history there. But we really want to see how this unfolds over the next several weeks and months. I think masks are here to stay for a long time. But again, we made the clear choice to do things a little differently.
That's interesting. So we'll keep an eye out for what you have coming down the pipe next. So to wrap things up, we'd love to hear any closing thoughts that you have, and if there's where audiences can follow along on your journey. We'd love to hear any closing thoughts.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier diversifying revenue streams. I think that's also incredibly important, and I think some people take this into consideration. Some influencers don't. Affiliate linking is a great way of generating, quote, passive income. But I also think getting your audience off of one singular platform is incredibly important as well. I think newsletters for creators are underrated and overlooked. I think that's a really impactful way of communicating with your audience, whether it's on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly basis. Text messaging platforms like Community are really important in an easy way to communicate directly with your audience. So I think to really focusing on developing a brand outside of that one platform is something to take into consideration.
Got it. That's interesting. Yeah, I think newsletters have become a very interesting niche. Email's been around for a long time, but you really don't see a lot of creators having their own. They typically have been media companies or individuals. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. So where can the audience find you?
What?
Where can the audience find you?
You can find me on at New York City, at New York or Nowhere, at baking, at food, and at real estate for all of our properties.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Liz. We'll keep an eye out for your future projects, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.